name is Matthew Parrish. I work at the Whitehall State Historic Site in Richmond, Kentucky. I'm actually sitting here inside the Whitehall Mansion. I'm starting a new video series where I'm going to show folks some of the amazing artifacts that are here at Whitehall. And I wanted to start off the first video with a bang, so to speak. These are two pistols that belong to Cassius Marcellus Clay, who lived here at Whitehall. This is a portrait of him right above me there. Cassius Clay was a Kentucky politician in the 1800s, an anti-slavery politician, and he's very well known for having a bit of a hot temper. He does get into some Bowie knife fights with other politicians, and he does have a duel in 1841, and these are said to be his original set of dueling pistols. Before I continue the video, I want to make clear that by no means am I condoning any sort of violence or anything that happens with these duels. Dueling was very common in America in the 1700s up until the 1840s when Cassius has this duel. It was a very old practice that came over from England and Ireland and France to America, and it just seems to persist up until the early 1800s. So again, I'm not condoning any of the violence, but I will say that I think the history of dueling really shows us a lot about life in early America. It shows us political issues of the time. It shows us societal expectations. A lot of the people having these duels were politicians. So anyway, just wanted to make that clear before I continue on. So, a little bit of information about these pistols. They were made around 1840. I don't have a specific date. In fact, we don't really know a whole lot about these pistols. What we do know is that it is a percussion lock system. You can see here the lock. It has a hammer. When you pull the trigger, that hammer hits a metal cap, kind of like a cap gun that a kid might use today. So it's a percussion lock, very, very intricately carved. There's carving on the top of the barrel here. There's carving at the base of the barrel. Beautiful carving there on the handle, as well as the lock on the bottom of the trigger guard there on the hammer. Really, really fine, beautiful examples of 19th century gunsmithing. We don't exactly know who made these pistols. There is a very small clue on the barrel. There is a very small, what's called a proof mark. It's just a small stamp, and it says ELG. Been doing a little bit of research on these pistols lately, and ELG is a proof mark that you see on a lot of Belgian-made guns that come from the 1800s. Belgium was sort of a mecca of gunsmithing in the 1800s. Belgian gunsmiths make a lot of old shotguns, but they also are famous for making some dueling pistols as well. There's some neat details about this set of dueling pistols. For one thing that makes it this set really interesting, and I've never seen it on any other gun except this, is that on the bottom, there's a very small little cap there on the bottom. It's got a silver cap on the bottom of the handle, and you can actually do this very carefully. Open it up. There's a little door there and a very small little chamber. Not exactly sure what that's used for. My guess is that maybe you can keep an extra round, an extra ball or lead ball there. But a really neat little detail there. It's got a cool little hidden compartment. These dueling pistols are very unique because they have rifling on the inside of the barrel. Very quickly, I'll go over this. So rifling on the inside of the barrel are grooves cut in. That's going to make that ball spin, which makes it more accurate when you fire this pistol. Most dueling pistols were smooth bore. Smooth bore guns, it's basically just like a smooth pipe, and when that bullet leaves the barrel, it might have been bouncing around, it's not spinning, it might just be going straight, so that means it could go anywhere. Smoothbore guns are very inaccurate. Rifled guns are quite accurate. Interesting thing about this, in the 1770s, there was a book written on how to duel. I kid you not, it's called the Irish Code Duello. And this basically is a rule book that talks about how to duel, what you should use, the different rules that go along with dueling. And in the Irish Code Duello, written in 1777, it states that if you are going to be using pistols, they have to be smoothbore pistols. So most dueling pistols that you see are smoothbore, and at least in the 1770s, it would have been considered cowardly or ungentlemanlike to use a rifled pistol. So that was sort of the widely agreed upon standard in terms of a dueling code. But you do see some dueling pistols with rifling. There's actually some dueling pistols that come from England that have basically a hidden rifling inside the barrel. Along the inside, from the back to almost the front, it's rifled, but then at the very end, they stop that rifling. So if you just look down the bore, it looks like it's a smoothbore gun. So if you were inspecting your dueling opponent's pistol, you would think it's a smoothbore, but it's actually a rifled pistol. So kind of a sneaky thing there. However, all that to be said, by the 1800s, early 1800s, there was sort of a different kind of dueling culture in America, if you could call it that, especially in the South. The Irish Code Duello was something that had definitely affected dueling culture in America, but especially by the 1820s, 1830s, American duelists are kind of doing their own thing. There's actually even a duel that takes place in 1838 outside of Washington, D.C., where two state representatives use hunting rifles. They don't use pistols, they don't use swords and sabers, they use rifles. One of them is killed. So it could be argued that these are actually not dueling pistols because they have rifling in them. But you could also argue that by the 1840s, duelists like Cassius Clay probably didn't care. So just letting you know, these are most likely a set of dueling pistols, although they're not like most other dueling pistols. So that brings us to a very important question. Did these pistols in fact belong to Cassius Clay? It can be hard sometimes to figure out what things belong to what people. These don't have Cassius's name on them, so how do we know for sure? There's a couple of clues. Cassius Clay wrote a memoir when he was older in the 1880s about his life. He talks about growing up, he talks about being in the military and being a politician, and he mentions having dueling pistols. And one thing, there's a clue that he mentions twice that I think is a good clue to show that these are most likely originals that belong to Cassius. He mentions how nice they look on two different occasions. One, he describes his pistols as first class. So he says, so a set of first class dueling pistols. And then on another occasion, he mentions that the dueling pistols that he have are splendid. He says, I have a splendid set of dueling pistols. So there's a couple of clues from Cassius, but again, not a whole lot of detail. What is the best clue is actually how these pistols actually get to Whitehall. So these pistols, after Cassius had passed away, found themselves in the possession of a man named Herman L. Donovan. Donovan was a past president of the University of Kentucky and a member of a group of historians that was called the Book Thieves Club. This is a really cool group that not a whole lot of people know about. A group of historians, of men, and some women, I think, were also involved. All of them were from Kentucky. A couple of other famous members was a man named William Townsend. William Townsend was a Kentucky historian. He actually was one of the first historians to write about Cassius Clay. He gives a speech about Cassius, and it becomes a book in the 1950s. William Townsend also collected a lot of original items that belonged to Abraham Lincoln, so he knew his antiques. Another person was Thomas D. Clark, a very famous Kentucky historian, wrote many books, and the Kentucky State Historical Society Museum is named after Thomas D. Clark. So the fact that Donovan was in with this group of historians who were collecting stories, collecting actual pieces of artifacts, the fact that he would have been friends with William Townsend, who gave the Whitehall several original Cassius Clay items, makes me believe that these are most likely the real deal. So there's some stories in Cassius Clay's memoir where he talks about using a set of dueling pistols, and both of them are pretty interesting and slightly humorous. One story is he goes on a buffalo hunt and he decides to use pistols. So Cassius was a captain during the Mexican-American War, and him and a group of cavalry leave Kentucky and they go down to Texas. And he's given leave for some reason and decides to go out to the Texas frontier and hunt buffalo. He says in his memoir he's never seen buffalo before and he wanted to hunt one. So it's kind of like a safari. He mentions in his memoir that he brought a rifle, but he decided when he sees a bull buffalo that he wants to try to hunt. He leaves his rifle on the ground and he decides that he's going to shoot this buffalo with one of his dueling pistols and then scamper up a tree to make sure that he doesn't get attacked after the buffalo is probably going to attack after it's been shot. So he said that I had a brace of first-class dueling pistols in my belt. He sees a buffalo, he goes and tries to fire at it. He doesn't end up killing it. So this is one mention of having I had a brace of first-class dueling pistols in my belt. So the second mention also happens on his way down to Mexico to fight in the Mexican-American War. He almost gets into a duel with a man named Thomas F. Marshall. Cassius hated Marshall. Marshall had been made a captain of another cavalry unit that Cassius was with. Thomas F. Marshall had also attacked Cassius Clay's anti-slavery newspaper. He started an abolitionist newspaper in 1845, and the newspaper office basically gets attacked. A group of men sort of start a committee, and they decide that they need this anti-slavery paper out of their town. It was in Lexington, and while Cassius is sick and away, Thomas F. Marshall is in this. Basically a mob, and they break in and they dismantle his newspaper press and send it to Cincinnati. So because of that, Cassius really hated Thomas Marshall, and he's basically dogging him and trying to get Marshall to duel him while they're going down to Texas. Finally, what happens is Thomas Marshall rides into Cassius Clay's camp, which he had just set, and he gets off his horse and begins getting ready to make his own camp, and Cassius goes right up to Marshall and he tells him to leave and tells him to go and camp somewhere else. Marshall sort of curses under his breath and gets on his horse and starts to leave when Cassius hears what Marshall said and basically challenges him to a duel. Marshall says something along the lines of perhaps another time, and one of my favorite Cassius Clay lines, he says, "The time to duel for men with swords is now," and he urges Marshall to duel him. Finally, Marshall had ridden away but comes back with a set of his own dueling pistols. And this is when, I'm quoting him directly, Cassius Clay says, "I entered my tent where I kept always loaded a splendid pair of dueling pistols." After he walks out of his tent, he says, "I am ready for you, sir," while holding his two pistols in the air. And Thomas Marshall apparently left, and the duel did not actually happen. So those are two times in Cassius Clay's memoir where he specifically mentions using his own set of dueling pistols. The third thing that I'll talk about and that I'll end with is the duel that Cassius has in 1841. The problem is he ever actually mentions if he uses his own set of dueling pistols. I would think that he would. These are the correct time period for when the duel happens. These pistols were made sometime in the late 1830s, early 1840s. The duel happens in 1841. So I will say this, I don't know exactly if Cassius used these pistols, but these are most likely Cassius Clay's dueling pistols. So in 1841, Cassius Clay was running for a seat in the Kentucky State House, and he has a debate with a man named Robert Wycliffe Jr. In the city of Lexington here in Kentucky. Robert Wycliffe Jr. was a pro-slavery politician, and he had basically started a rally one day in the city of Lexington where he and other pro-slavery politicians and advocates were giving speeches. And Cassius hears about this rally and basically decides to show up, crash the party, bring some of his own guys, and he debates Robert Wycliffe at his own rally. So this is a quote from Cassius Clay talking about the rally. He says, the greatest slaveholders from town and country came to Lexington and joined the processions. Inflammatory speeches were made in their part and met with equal force on ours, so that at length Wycliffe introduced my wife's name in a speech to which I took exception as inadmissible, and I challenged him. So that's what Cassius Clay says. That's how the duel gets started. They decide to meet in Louisville. They go to the grounds of a very nice home called Locust Grove, which you can actually go to and visit in Louisville. It's a historic site, just like Whitehall. There's an account of what Cassius says actually happens in the duel as well. So I'll read that here. So at the duel, this is what he says happens. Colonel William R. McKee was my second. A quick little thing about McKee, he actually graduated from West Point and was killed at the Battle of Buena Vista during the Mexican-American War. And Albert Sidney Johnston was Wycliffe's. If there's any Civil War buffs out there, you'll recognize that name. Johnston was a Confederate general and was killed at the Battle of Shiloh during the Civil War. Dr. Alexander Marshall, a brother of Thomas Marshall, was my surgeon. Very interesting that he hates Thomas Marshall, but he gets Thomas Marshall's brother to be his surgeon. I've always thought that was kind of funny. And he says, I do not remember, but I think Dr. Caldwell was the surgeon of Wycliffe. That's most likely a doctor or a physician named Charles Caldwell, which a little tidbit about him, he helped start the University of Louisville School of Medicine. So there's a bunch of kind of important people here showing up at this duel. It's kind of a who's who of Kentucky men here at this dueling ground. So he says about the duel, he says, we fired at 10 paces at the word and both missed. Raising my pistol up perpendicularly, I stood still and demanded a second fire, but the good sense of our seconds prevailed, and it was decreed that the matter should be dropped. No apology was made on either side, and no reconciliation was proposed, and we left the ground enemies as we came. So the duel didn't solve anything. Nobody got hurt, thank goodness. Normally with duels, you're supposed to, if nobody gets hurt, it's sort of understood, oh, both men are gentlemen, both men are brave, and we'll call it a draw, we'll shake hands, we'll be friends. That apparently did not happen, according to Cassius at least. So it's really amazing because not only do we have Cassius Clay's account of what happens with the duel, we have another account of what happens with this duel. The man living at this home, Locust Grove, at that time was a man named John Croghan, and he wrote a letter to somebody shortly after the duel happened, and he talked about what happened at the duel. So he says here, it seems Mr. Cassius Clay of Lexington and Mr. Wycliffe Jr. are candidates for the assembly, and in the heat of debate, while addressing the multitude, the former spoke very disparagingly of the father of the latter. So that's interesting. Cassius Clay said that Robert Wycliffe Jr. had mentioned Cassius Clay, his wife's name in a speech, and that causes him to get angry, and he challenged Wycliffe to the duel. John Croghan is saying that Cassius said something bad about Robert Wycliffe's father, and Wycliffe challenged Cassius to a duel. So not entirely sure now how it got started. Perhaps it was both. Who knows? The consequence of which was Wycliffe challenged Clay. They fought near our mill. They missed, but my opinion has that they are men of courage. He says, after the affair was over, all parties came to the house. I had for all something to eat and drink, and I think they went home as happy as they left here. So there you have it. Two Kentucky politicians, they meet on the dueling grounds. They fire at each other once. They both miss. Cassius tries to shoot Wycliffe a second time, but their seconds talk them out of it. They left the ground enemies as they came, but then apparently they went to Locust Grove and had lunch together. So really amazing. So an amazing set of dueling pistols here, very intricately carved, very beautiful detail work here, and such amazing stories that go along with them. So I thank everybody for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I've just started the YouTube channel for Whitehall, so there are going to be more videos to come. So stay tuned to learn about more treasures that are here at the Whitehall State Historic Site.